The NFL regular season has finally concluded as wildcard weekend is right around the corner. This was an incredibly interesting year of football that was full of tons of surprises. For example, the Houston Texans defied all odds, entering the season with an over-under in wins set at 6.5. They finished 10-7, winning the AFC South led by CJ Stroud, who has proven to be a star after just one season. Sticking in the AFC, the Cleveland Browns and Pittsburgh Steelers had almost identical seasons in their division. Both were projected at 8.5 wins in the preseason and were expected to be borderline playoff teams, but both teams exceeded those expectations, despite not really knowing who their starting quarterback was going to be for a significant portion of the season. In the NFC, a 3-game winning streak to end the year helped the Packers squeak into the wildcard spot at 9-8. Just 2 years following a Super Bowl win, the Rams are back in the mix, and the Bucs won the NFC South division to the surprise of many. All in all, lots of fan bases are entering this weekend happy with how their squad performed these past 18 weeks. But of course, that's not the case for everyone. There are many other teams that left their fan base pissed off or maybe straight up heartbroken following this past week of football. In this video, we're going to focus on those and break down the 8 most disappointing NFL teams of the 2023 season. Before I get into it, welcome to the War Room. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you're new, and let's get straight to it. Starting off with number 8, the Minnesota Vikings. Now, this team does deserve a lot of credit for being in the hunt for the playoffs as long as they were, considering all the injuries they had. Kirk Cousins suffered a Week 8 Achilles tear ending his season. Justin Jefferson missed 7 games with a hamstring injury, then got injured again in his first game back. At the end of the year, TJ Hockenson tore his ACL and MCL, but despite these injuries to key players on offense, Minnesota had a 7-6 record entering Week 15. You could argue that at that point in the season, they were overachieving, and it all eventually caught up to them as they finished the year on a 4-game losing streak. Considering that 3 out of those 4 losses to finish the season were all winnable games, and the team probably would have made the playoffs had everyone been healthy, there has to be some sort of disappointment for fans entering the offseason. Moving to number 7, we have the New York Jets. If you told Jets fans in August that they would finish 7-10 and miss the playoffs for the 13th consecutive year, they would obviously have a very sour reaction, considering how high their hopes were following the offseason. But one big reason as to why I don't consider them a top 5 most disappointing team is because unlike every other franchise on this list, the heartbreak came all at one moment, during the very first drive in the very first game. Once Aaron Rodgers suffered a season-ending Achilles injury and got carted off the sideline, most people who have been Jets fans for a long time came to terms with the fact that any hopes of making the playoffs were immediately gone. They were forced to watch another year of Zach Wilson and co. attempt to lead the organization to something promising and came up short once again. Had this been their record with Rodgers, they probably would have been number 1 on this list of most disappointing teams, but this list is adjusted for expectation, and expectations were as low as ever following his injury. At number 6, we have the Washington Commanders. Simply put, this past season was an absolute shit show for Washington. Heading into the season, they weren't projected to be very good, with an over-under in wins set at 7.5. So to be on this disappointment list, you had to have had played significantly worse than your over-under projection, and the Commanders certainly fit that criteria. This Washington team was a lot closer to being winless than most people realize. All 4 of their wins were one-possession games that came against teams that finished the season below 500. They finished the year on an 8-game losing streak, the longest losing streak for any team in the league this season, and their defense was historically awful. Washington allowed 518 points throughout the course of the season, which translates to 30.5 points per game. Since 2000, only 6 teams have allowed more points per game than the 2023 Commanders, and those 518 points let up are the 3rd most allowed by a defense in a single season in NFL history. Their point differential of -189 is the franchise's worst since 1961. In my personal opinion, NFL fans this season let the poor play of other teams distract them from the fact of how bad the Washington Commanders actually were. Head coach Ron Rivera got fired a few days ago, and if there was even a glimmer of hope from fans that the franchise was close to competing anytime soon, this season certainly set the record straight on how far away they actually are. Heading into the top 5, I have the Carolina Panthers. When you have the worst record in the league, it's going to be hard to avoid this list. The Panthers are in that same boat of teams that weren't necessarily expected to be that great, but still played way worse than people thought they would. They won just 2 games, each by a margin of just 2 points. They rank 31st in points per game on offense and 29th in points allowed per game on defense. All things considered, Bryce Young made the most of what he had surrounding him. I know a lot of people are going to use him as the scapegoat, but Frank Reich got fired mid-season, season, and it's not like Young was working with some star-studded roster. There are so many other young quarterbacks that would have played the same, if not worse than Bryce Young if they were put in his shoes. With all that being said, CJ Stroud is a better quarterback, and the Panthers front office made the wrong selection this past draft. Again, not saying Carolina would have won this division by simply having a different QB, there's still a lot they need to work on, but it must suck seeing the dude taken one pick later absolutely light up the league while still being this uncertain about the guy you chose. On top of that, it's not even like the fans can look forward to drafting a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. to help out Young because the Chicago Bears own the Panthers' first overall pick for the 2024 draft. These next few years are probably going to be hell for fans in Carolina, and their franchise rebuild is already off to a very rocky start. Next up, I have the New England Patriots. I know there were plenty of Pats fans that had high hopes for Mac Jones entering this season, but there were several factors that caused him to regress heavily in year 3, leaving a question mark on his future with the team. Just from watching this team week to week, it felt like every close game that was coming down to the wire and seemed winnable, they lost. A 5-point loss to the Eagles, 4-point loss to the Raiders, 3-point loss to the Commanders, 4-point loss to the Colts, 3-point loss to the Giants, and a 6-0 shutout loss versus the Chargers all contributed to the worst Patriots season in about 30 years. This is a fan base that isn't used to the sheer incompetence we witnessed these past 18 weeks, and for a very large portion of the fan base, this is uncharted territory. It was officially announced recently that head coach Bill Belichick is parting ways with the team, meaning the franchise will enter the offseason not knowing who their starting quarterback will be, with a new head coach, not knowing how long it'll be before we see them return to the playoffs. To kick off the top 3, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals are similar to the Vikings in that they dealt with several injuries on offense that really affected their playoff chances, but unlike the Vikings, the Bengals were projected to win their division. In a very ironic twist, they finished last place at 9-8, while being the only team in their division to not make the playoffs, while their Week 18 victory over the Browns' backups was the only game all season they defeated an AFC North opponent. Cincinnati has kind of made it their thing to get off to slow starts to the season. When they made the Super Bowl 2 years ago, they started that season 7-6. Last season, they went 4-4 before going on an 8-game winning streak and winning the division at 12-4. But this year, everyone else in the AFC North caught up to them, and their 5-6 record through 11 games was too much to overcome that late into the season. And now, Cincinnati fans will be forced to watch all 3 of their rivals in the playoffs. Moving to number 2, I've got the Los Angeles Chargers. It's pretty incredible how in the Justin Herbert era, an era that was supposed to change the course and identity of this franchise, they've managed to underachieve every single year. This season was no different, and as always, there is some blame on the injury bug. Herbert was dealing with multiple finger injuries throughout the course of the season before he was shut down for the year. Mike Williams tore his ACL in September, and Austin Eckler missed time with an ankle injury from week 1. But if you've paid any attention to Chargers football this past, 2 decades, you would know that the arch nemesis of this organization is the one-possession game. And that continued in 2023. They suffered a 2-point loss to the Dolphins, a 3-point overtime loss to the Titans, a 3-point loss to the Cowboys, 3-point loss to the Lions, 3-point loss to the Packers, 2-point loss to the Bills, and a 1-point loss to the Chiefs. That is 7 games they lost by 3 points or less. It's really interesting how when you look at the talent this roster has, they're good enough to make some noise in the playoffs. There's no real lack of talent, they just simply can't perform when needed. In cases like this, it's almost worse to have a team like the Chargers than a rebuilding team like the Patriots or Panthers, because at least those teams you can look at and say, we need this, this, and this if we want a chance at competing. But in the case of LA, they pretty much have everything they need. At least on offense, there's no quarterback, running back, or wide receiver they could realistically bring in that would be better than what they have now. No, their defense isn't great by any means, but it's almost like the offense and defense are incapable of both playing well in the same game. Hopefully for Chargers fans, the firing of Brandon Staley can change the culture of this team. Otherwise, they'll continue to waste their talented roster. And lastly, the number 1 most disappointing team of 2023 belongs to the Jacksonville Jaguars, another team that was projected to win their division. But what makes their failure to make the playoffs worse than anyone else in the entire league is they controlled their own destiny the entire way and choked miserably. After a thrilling comeback victory over the Chargers in the playoffs last season, 2023 appeared to be the year this franchise took the next step in Super Bowl contention. This is a team that had an 8-3 record through 11 games and were cruising on their way to an AFC South title, but one Trevor Lawrence injury in Week 13 completely killed any momentum this franchise had. They went on to lose that game in overtime against the Bengals, followed by a 4-point loss to the Browns in Week 14, a Week 15 loss against the Ravens, and a Week 16 loss versus the Buccaneers. After defeating the Panthers, the Jaguars entered Week 18 at 9-7, but just needed to beat the last place Tennessee Titans to win the division. Despite Tennessee giving them plenty of opportunities to win the game, the Jaguars came up short, losing 28-20, losing 5 out of 6 games to end the season, missing the playoffs entirely. Based on expectation and how promising this group looked the majority of the year, this ending to the season without a doubt makes the Jacksonville Jaguars the biggest disappointment of 2023. And that wraps up this video. Please let me know in the comments below what you agree or disagree with. Like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.